Welcome to Channel 18 News. I'm Jim Rogers. Following a hearing Monday, a jury was picked Tuesday, and the trial began Wednesday in 8th Judicial District Court for Bradley Curtis Cougar, age 41. He's on trial for aggravated sexual assault of a child under 6 years of age, sexual performance by a child 14 years of age, indecency with a child's sexual conduct, attempted sexual performance by a child. During a hearing Monday, the children involved in the incident and family members were called as witnesses by District Attorney Will Ramsey, as Judge Eddie Northcutt ruled whether their testimony would be heard during the trial. Although Cougar was living in Hopkins County at the time of the offenses, he was thought to be in Kentucky, as law enforcement in Hopkins County and Kentucky sought him. However, he turned himself in, along with his attorney. He turned himself in Hopkins County Jail in October 2017. The trial began 9 a.m. Wednesday morning. Although Hopkins County Commissioners Court tabled an item on Monday's agenda, that item will grace the Friday agenda for a special session of the court. The addendum of the item to purchase a new technologically updated voting equipment for elections in Hopkins County will be on the special meeting agenda as a result of a conversation between Hopkins County Commissioners and County Clerk Debbie Shirley Monday during a budget work session that followed the regular meeting of the court. Commissioners had voted to table the purchase of the new voting machines Monday after Commissioner Mike O'Dell stated he thought the new machines were too expensive, and Commissioner Wade Bartley said the current machines should be used until they could no longer work. For some time, Debbie Shirley, County Clerk, has wanted to improve the voting equipment for the county. They will decide that on Friday. In a local meet and greet Tuesday morning at the Oaks Bed and Breakfast in Sulphur Springs, two candidates vying for the state Senate seat, District 2, stated their opinions to the group of local educators and retired educators. Kendall Scudder, a Democrat, and Cindy Burkett, a Republican, each spoke and then answered questions from the group.
After Bob Hall filled out his school voucher bill, I said, oh no. And we hadn't run a Democrat in this area in a long time. And I think it's really important that the people of this district are able to see a strong advocate for public education. So I jumped into this race, and after I jumped into this race, we started seeing more bills that Bob Hall was writing. He wrote a bill that would have eliminated ESL in public schools. That's really bad for teachers who aren't bilingual, right? It effectively outsources your job to teachers who are bilingual. I think it's unacceptable. He wrote a bill to eliminate school breakfasts. I mean, guys, who are we? And how is this in line with our values and who we are? That's not what I learned growing up here. That best of luck to you, kid. Sorry you can't afford your breakfast, but you're on your own, right? You know, I grew up in a community where when somebody had a debilitating illness, we all pitched in and bought signs to put in our yard to fundraise for them, right? And we still do that because we look out for our neighbors and take care of each other. And that's not what I've seen coming from folks like Bob Hall. So, a little bit more about where I stand on some education issues. I oppose the A through F grading system. I think that school grading system sets you up to fail, and it's a system that was set up without any educators or school administrators in the room. I think we should scrap it entirely, and we should allow superintendents, school administrators, and teachers in the room to develop the new grading system. And people say, Kendall, be specific about what you want that grading system to be. I can't do that to you because I am not a career educator, and I have no business doing that, right? I am tired of these politicians in Austin thinking that they know better than you, okay? So I want you to sit down and create this grading system, educational professionals, so that we can sit down and really have a conversation about changing the way that we view education in Texas, okay? I think we should be reducing classroom sizes and cutting standardized tests. Now, everybody has been talking about cutting standardized tests for years, but they don't actually do it. And I was actually talking about this just a second ago with someone about why I suspect that they don't do it. We have given $1.5 billion to standardized testing companies since 2012. And they have political action committees that give money to people like Senator Hall and Mrs. Birkin, who you'll hear from later today. And so they both will tell you that they oppose standardized tests. But when Cindy comes here today, you need to ask her what she has done to reduce standardized tests. The answer is nothing, because you have seen the standardized tests continuously get shoved down our throats and increase in volume. And I think as a show of good faith, we should start by eliminating them from teachers' evaluations to show that we mean business.
You know, our futures are really shaped on decisions we make along the way, and I could have simply bemoaned the fact, you know, I can do that job. You won't give me that job because I don't have that piece of paper. I could have taken that route, or I could have just said, you know what, I'm a Texas woman, and if you put a roadblock in front of me, I'm going to turn it into a building block, and I'm going to move around it. So what I ended up doing was I went back to school. And my husband and I's budget did not allow for me just to quit my job and go back to school, so I worked full-time during the day, and I went to school at night. I often would be seen at my son's baseball games, sitting in the bleachers with a textbook on my lap, and you teachers may or may not appreciate that. But it was what we had to do to get me through that time. During that time, one of my professors suggested that I apply for an internship with one of my elected officials because he knew I was interested in policy. And that led to an internship with Senator Bob Dole. And eventually, after graduation, I had a permanent position with him, a position on his staff. While working on my degree, I also did an internship at Washington, D.C., working on the Hill with the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors. That's a mouthful. And 8 years after I started school, I graduated summa cum laude with a degree with a major in political science and a minor in business. I have two brothers that are mentally ill, and what has that got to do with this, I'm sure you're thinking, but watching my mom deal with that over the years and all the red tape involved with getting them help and services, I felt like there had to be a better way to do it. And I'm not the type, and if you are, congratulations, I'm not the type to pick up a sign and go pick it. I'm more the one that's going to look and say, how do we change this? What do we do? And so as I looked at how she had to deal with things, I started understanding that for me to make changes into the policy, I was going to have to understand the politics involved. And so I started volunteering at the Dallas County Republican Party's office and volunteered for candidates that agreed with things that I agreed with. And that's how I really got involved with that. During that time, I also was asked to run for a position on the State Republican Executive Committee. I don't know how many people are into politics here, but both parties have an executive committee. That's the Republican one. And so I ran for that, and I represented Senate District 2 for 2 terms. That's 4 years. And after that, the House district that I now represent had gone to a Democrat during the Obama swing. And I had several friends approach me, ask me if I'd consider running. And excuse me, after a 3-way primary of the year's November election, I'm glad to say that I took that seat. So people are asking me why I'm running for Senate District 2. I've been in the House 4 terms. I feel like I've been very successful there. I finally got a chair this last time around. And you are rewarded if you work really hard. And so it was a hard decision for me. But I had a lot of, it was really a grassroots recruitment. I had a lot of, can you all hear me okay in the back? Yes. If you can't wave at me, my husband tells me when I start getting real intense, my voice goes down. So just wave at me. But this has something that has good acoustics. But it was really a grassroots recruitment. I had a lot of people, interestingly enough, that had supported my opponent in the last election come up to me about a year and a half ago saying, have you ever thought about running for Senate? I said, no, really haven't. Would you? And I said, well, you know, I'm really comfortable with what I'm doing. I really like what I'm doing over here. And I thought you supported the current senator. Well, it's not, we're not getting what we thought. We're not seeing what we thought. I heard this over and over. First, it was just from a few people scattered here and there, and not just in my House district, but throughout the Senate. And then it was from the business community, and then finally the education community. And I go to church with a ton of educators, y'all. And I actually, my dad was a professor at what is now Texas State University. It used to be Southwestern Texas State University. I have an aunt that was a librarian for years and years. So I listen to those guys. I can't empathize because I haven't done it. But I want to be able to hear you and listen to you.
Caleb Pirtle III is a Texas writer and a Texas author on his way to Commerce, Texas A&M Commerce, to share in a workshop with the Silver Leo's Writers Guild. But he came through Sulphur Springs early this morning and for a chat in our studio as well about his books, 75 books to his credit, and his recent memoir, The Man Who Talks to Strangers. Let's meet Caleb Pirtle III.
Writing 75 books only means one thing. I've been around a long time, but writing's all I've ever done. All of life is a story, and people who live in the South tell stories. In fact, Time magazine had a cover story many years ago that said the reason so many writers come out of the South is that Southerners don't hold conversations. Southerners tell stories. They sit on their front porch. I tell you about my hogs. You tell me about your hogs. We think we've had a real good conversation.
I think you've nailed it right there. Now, I want to know a little bit about your background, like your connection with Kilgore, Texas.
I was born and raised in Kilgore, went to school at New London, and so I grew up on the cusp of the big oil boom. So I grew up smack dab in the middle of one of the great stories to ever come out of Texas and didn't realize it. But later on, when I looked back and realized that I had collected all of these stories that I'd heard in barber shops and shoe shine stands and Kay Woolen's department store, and you hear these things and you don't really pay a lot of attention, but somewhere back in the far corners of your mind they stay lodged, and one day you realize, I need to tell a story about the oil field, which is why I wrote the novel that came out this year called Backside of a Blue Moon.
Wow.
It's a little bit of Kilgore, a little bit of Henderson, a little bit of Longview, and a little bit of Overton, but it's in a fictional town called Ashland. But it's all about the oil field and the boom and the fools who came in and drilled oil in land that the oil company said was absolutely barren.
Ashland is the community name that you invented.
Yes.
This is of special interest to me because I'm from Longview, and of course Kilgore and Henderson, the names that you just mentioned, were all the places that were the world to me, and seeing those pumping stations going up and down everywhere you drove.
Well, when I grew up in Kilgore, we had 1,100 oil derricks inside the city limits. It was just an absolute, one of the great wonders of the world. In fact, you're talking about growing up in Longview. One of the great stories is that after the oil boom hit Kilgore and oil was spilling all over Kilgore and Overton and Henderson, the Chamber of Commerce at Longview put up a $10,000 reward for anybody who would drill oil in Longview. And that's how the Longview field came in.
Wow.
People were going in. And the interesting thing is, the firm that came into Longview and drilled the first well, the Chamber of Commerce did not have $10,000. They didn't think anybody would do it.
Amazing story. You have gathered these stories, not just from personal experience, but from people, because you say that you are a thief.
I am a thief. I may be the only person who ever sits behind this microphone and looks at you eyeball to eyeball and admits to being a thief, because everyone I meet, I talk to, and everyone I talk to has a story, and I steal it, and sooner or later I print it. I publish it in a novel or in a nonfiction book. But those stories are so important, and you can talk about Sulphur Springs, and it reads like a Chamber of Commerce brochure. You sit around the Pioneer Cafe and talk to those folks, and later on you realize there's a whole lot to Sulphur Springs that you didn't realize, because what happens is never as important as the people who make it happen, and I steal their stories.
I love the way you admit to that, because I think we do sort of have to borrow, if you want to call it that. Jim Ainsworth, a colleague of yours and in Hopkins County, was speaking last evening at a local event, and I think he takes snatches of this and bits of that and saves them like a lady would saving quilt scraps, and later they show up like you were talking about.
Well, that's a real good analogy, because in reality, a story is like a quilt. It's a patchwork of stories and ideas and thoughts that had come from a lot of different sources and a lot of different people. And it's kind of like Dolly Parton's song, when you get through with it, it's like a coat of many colors, whether you knit it, whether you quilt it, or whether you tell it.
I want to talk, let the listeners hear about your various platforms you had to write from, such as Southern Living magazine.
Well, I majored in journalism, and then I had newspaper jobs in Plainview out in West Texas, and also for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And when Governor John Connally started the Texas Tourist Development Agency, I had done a lot of feature stories on Texas for the Star-Telegram, and he hired me to come down and write stories about Texas and work with travel writers all over the country and bring them to Texas. And from there, I went to Southern Living magazine when they started the magazine in the late 60s, and stayed there as travel editor for 10 years. And then came back to Texas, freelanced for several years, worked for a major custom publisher in Dallas, and for the last few years, I've just been writing novels. And somewhere along the way, I've written 3 television teleplays that were produced.
I read those titles yesterday. Those were very interesting stories.
Well, my writing partner out in L.A., Frank Dobbs, he and I wrote a screenplay called The Texas Rangers that John Milius used for his TNT television movie, Texas Rangers. And then we wrote a CBS miniseries for Gambler 5, starring Kenny Rogers and that group.
Okay, fascinating. Well, the opportunities that you found or made, let me say made, you mentioned when you would go to a town, and you were headquartered in Alabama during the
in
Southern
Birmingham,
Living.
Yes.
Okay. You would find the oldest person that was visible to you and ask for their story.
I'd find the oldest man whittling and whistling on the courthouse lawn. We'd sit and talk for a spell. I never asked him a question. We'd just start talking. And people love to tell you about their hometown. And then they love to tell you about themselves and their lives in that hometown. And after a while, they tell you all about their friends in that hometown. And if you talk long enough, they start to tell you their secrets. And when they get to the secrets, you've got a story.
I want to sidetrack just a moment about New London. We here know about that New London tragedy because Bill Bradford still has his day in history that plays throughout the year, and it's always marked of the day of the New London tragedy, and people who lived here who were connected with that. That was, you also went to that school.
I grew up on a farm between Kilgore and Henderson, not too far from New London. So I went to school at New London from the second grade to the 9th grade. And even then, the tragedy and the horror of that day in 1937 always hovered like a black cloud over those people. And you could tell when March was approaching, because when March came, people didn't talk as much as they did, and they never laughed at all. And you was almost always hoping for summer because brightness would come back to New London. My mother was a waitress at Turnertown, and my father was working in the oil field. He came from West Texas to East Texas during the oil boom in Kilgore, and when the school exploded, they were 2 of the first people on the scene. And as long as I lived, up until a couple of years before my mother died, neither she nor my father ever talked about New London. I finally got her to tell me her story, and it's in my book.
Okay. Your memoirs?
My memoir, The Man Who Talks to Strangers. Thank God for strangers. And everybody I meet is a stranger, and the stories they tell get stranger all the time.
The Man Who Talks to Strangers, a memoir of sorts by Caleb Purtle III. Where might we find this book?
You can find it on Amazon. Amazon and BarnesandNobles.com have really become the new bookstores of the digital revolution and the world of digital publishing. So people browse through Amazon the way they used to browse through bookstores.
Although I still love bookstores.
Bookstores are absolutely wonderful. And if anybody's listening, they need to go to the bookstore in Kilgore.
Yeah?
Stephen Woodfin has a wonderful bookstore. He's a great writer in his own right. And as a writer, he always dreamed to have a bookstore. And now he does. And it's a place where people don't really go to look at books. They go to sit down and visit. It's kind of, he has a place for books, coffee, and conversation.
Wonderful. I'm going to go there.
You need to go there.
We have only a minute or so to devote to this, but the chasm between old-fashioned publishing, that was the whole world then, and the digital publishing of today, was it easy for you to cross?
You know, it's absolutely difficult to cross because all the rules changed. Even the New York publishers don't know what to do with it. And people think, boy, if I wrote back in the golden age, I would make a fortune. Now it's really tough because you have to do your own promotion, because even if you were signed by a New York publisher, they no longer do your marketing. They just publish your book. And people don't realize back in the golden age, a New York publisher would produce 300 titles a year and hope they sold 7 titles well enough that they could make a profit and pay off the losses on the other 293 books. So publishing has always been a struggle and a fight, but those who succeed are those who keep writing and someday catch lightning in a bottle.
I wish I could have found the coffee table book that we have about Texas travel, Caleb Purtle III, the author, and I looked for it briefly this morning. I only found out that you could come yesterday, and so I didn't have much time to prepare, but you wrote many of these type?
Well, probably the book you have is Texas, Its Lore and Lure, that I did with an artist in Dallas.
Okay.
Have done a lot of books on Texas, the Texas Outback, which is about the Big Bend country. So Texas offers itself to a coffee top type book because it has such magnificent venues, such wonderful country, and such fascinating people.
Do you choose to read an actual book with pages or digital?
Both. In fact, what few people realize, most books today are read on the telephone. And the reason is, Newsweek did a study, most people on average spend 2 hours and 47 minutes every day standing in line. They're either in the supermarket, the dental office, the doctor's office, they're sitting in their car waiting to pick up their child from school. They have nothing to do. They whip out their phone and they have their Kindle book on their phone and they sit there and read it.
Here's Don Julian with sports.
Lady Cats junior volleyball player Autumn Tanton was recently named to the Texas Sports Writers Association All-State Volleyball Team as an honorable mention selection. I talked about that honor with Lady Cats volleyball coach Justin Manus.
Oh, that's always exciting, especially to be recognized in the state of Texas in volleyball. And there's a lot of good volleyball players in the state, and just to have that honor or be an honorable mention is really good.
She had a really good season for you this year, didn't she?
She was very consistent. She became a student of the game. She knew how to score with different shots. She knew how to score in different situations. She really absorbed a lot of volleyball this year, and it really showed. Her hitting percentage was the highest on the team, which really shows that she knew what she was doing and is becoming a learner in volleyball.
It's exciting to have her back, isn't it?
Oh, it is exciting to have her back. You know, she's going to be even better next year. She's going to be expected to be a big leader for us next year. She's been in the trenches and she knows what it takes, and I think that she's just going to grow as a player.
Is she a vocal leader or more that just kind of shows it on the court?
She's a little bit of both. You can hear Autumn get excited, but she also is a leader on the court. You can tell she's a competitor. She wants to win, and I think she brings everybody up to that level.
Tanton was also selected first team All-District and academic All-District. This year's Lady Cats team finished 28-13, and they won the district championship. The Saltillo Lions and Saltillo Lady Lions were involved in basketball games on Tuesday night. The Lions dropped a close one to Wolf City 46-42, while the Lady Lions won big over Sulphur Bluff 65-24. The Lions got off to a slow start and they trailed Wolf City 8-4 after the first quarter. The Lions rallied to take a 20-17 halftime lead. Wolf City responded with a strong third quarter and went ahead 35-26. The Lions outscored Wolf City 17-10 in the fourth quarter, but ended up 4 points behind at 46-42. Trevor Moore led the Lions with 10 points. Walker McGill and Chris Bocourse both scored 8 points. Matthew Gurley had 6 points, Levi Hoover 5 points, Michael Clover 3 points, and Lyle Bench 2 points. The Lions are now 14-13 for the season. They play at Fannondale on Friday. The Lady Lions outscored Sulphur Bluff in every quarter in their win. Madison Simmons had a big scoring game for the Lady Lions with 30 points. Anna Reeder scored 9 points. Jordan Sester, Tori Mobley, and Maddie Smith scored 6 points each. Jocelyn Ochoa had 3 points. Chandler Bain and Christy Gurley scored 2 points apiece. The Lady Lions improved their season record to 11-15, and they play next at Fannondale on Friday.
Thanks for watching Channel 18 News. Have a great evening.